And coming up on this week's Green Signals. Is the £2 billion contract for 54 HS2 trains about to be rewritten? And is it true that HS2 is going to end in a field, as was reported last week? Plus, we preview some very exciting upcoming videos. So welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and...
from me, Richard Bowker.
Well, HS2 is in the news again, Richard, and it's more trouble for government. Our first report is about rolling stock, or, if you prefer, trains. It was reported in the Times on March 7th that officials from the Department for Transport and counterparts of the two train builders, Hitachi Rail and Alstom, had opened negotiations to reduce the number of trains from the 54 sets currently on order, as well as reconfiguring train length. According to the Times, changing the terms of the contract could result in penalty payments or compensation to the two train makers. Sounds like a big problem, Richard, and I've always been told that contractual amendments are lucrative for the train maker. You've bought more than a few over the years. What say you?
You're absolutely right. They're lucrative, and it's the reason why we avoid them like
the proverbial.
The thing you want to. Yes, indeed. So probably worth just starting with what was in the public domain before this story broke, because it's obviously relevant.
Bit of context.
So as you said, there's obviously a contract in place for this. It was announced in December 2021. It's a few years ago now, isn't it?
Grief.
HS2 announced it had awarded a contract to a Hitachi Alstom joint venture for the new trains for HS2. And in that it said contract was worth around £2 billion. It would include the design, the build, and interestingly, the maintenance for 12 years for a fleet of 54, quote, state-of-the-art, 225 mile per hour high-speed trains. They would be built by Alstom and Hitachi Rail at their various plants in County Durham, Newton Aycliffe, obviously, and then for Alstom at Derby and Crewe. And the deal would support 2,500 jobs, and it would boost the economy by over £150 million per annum. So, it was all a big deal and everybody got very excited about it. Now, in that press release, it talked about 432 body shells or, carriages effectively. So if you divide 432 by 54, that's 8. So these are 8 car trains, and they would each be 200 meters long. That becomes relevant later on. And with a seating capacity of something like 550 seats. Now, by being 200 meters long, that gave them quite a lot of flexibility, right? You could operate it as one 200 meter long train, or you could stick 2 of them together, be 400 meters long. And between London and Birmingham on phase 1, the bit that we're currently building, platforms would be 400 meters, but it would enable the trains to then run off HS2 onto the classic network and go to places where you could only fit a 200 meter long train. However, critically, once phase 2 was built to Manchester, where Piccadilly would have a 400 meter long platform station, you could still have your 2 trains run a couple together, where you would obviously get around 1,100 seats per train. And the problem, and what's coming next, the problem is when Rishi Sunak cancelled the entirety of phase 2, it threw a spanner in the works for all sorts of reasons, and it's a bit of a case of where on earth do you begin with this?
It is, isn't it? So, well, we decided to begin by asking an expert. So we spoke with our old friend William Barter, one of Britain's most experienced timetable and service planners who's worked extensively on HS2 over the years as a consultant, to see what he had to say.
William, thanks ever so much for joining us on Green Signals again. HS2 back in the news. This time it's trains. The Times has reported that they're going to have to renegotiate the contract, which is a bit of a worrying thing because the trains are the wrong length. Is this day always been inevitable ever since Rishi Sunak cancelled HS2 to Manchester?
I think it probably has. It's one of those things that might have been lurking at the back of that minibar and was overlooked in the decision making. But yes, the original HS2 concept was to use 200 metre sets, which could be paired to make 400 metre trains. And given the full phase 2, those 400 metre trains could operate as required commercially between London and Birmingham, certainly also Scotland, Manchester and Leeds. Well, without phase 2, only Birmingham could now be served by 400 metre trains for peak requirements. Manchester and Scotland would have to be served by single 200 metre sets. And the problem there is that a 200 metre HS2 set has fewer seats than an 11-car Pendolino. So unless the train service frequency were to go up, which is probably impossible because of capacity on the conventional network, there'd be fewer seats per hour being offered between London and Scotland and London and Manchester. Now, Scotland, I think, is a big problem, given the loadings we're seeing and the wish to compete with air. Manchester might be less of a problem because, remember, the trains are only doing end-to-end business and not serving intermediate flows like Milton Keynes to Stoke or Rugby to Manchester. There would have to be, as far as I can see, it's inescapable, I think, that there would have to be at least an hourly conventional service between Euston and Manchester. And given that, you would be seeing roughly the same number of seats as now. And that's the sort of thing that you might decide to sweat for a few years, demand manage your way out of it and all the rest of it. As long as the long-term solution, phase 2, were guaranteed before too much longer. And the trouble is, now it isn't. It may well come along at some point, decades downstream, but in the short term, there needs to be a sustainable solution preserving and preferably improving seating capacity to Manchester and to Scotland. So the idea seems to be, and I have no inside information on this, is just what I've heard people talking about, to have a number of sets that are 250 metres long and therefore provide roughly the same number of seats as a Pendolino does now.
Oh, so you could potentially have a mixed fleet of some 250 and some 200. I mean, that sounds really problematic from an operational point of view. And what about things like the depot and the maintenance facilities? I mean, they're presumably designed for one particular solution.
Yes, I mean, operationally, nobody wants a mixed fleet, but we've got plenty. We've got 9 and 11-car Pendolinos now. We were going to have classic compatible and captive sets on HS2, and we planned round it. So I don't see that as being prohibitive. The depot, I think, is an issue because Washwood Heath, although the stabling sidings are planned to be able to take a 400-metre train, the maintenance shed itself, as I remember, was only planned to take a single 200-metre set on each road. So a 250-metre set would be sticking out of the end, which isn't very good. How do you maintain the other 2 cars outside and it's blocking access to all the other roads while you do it? So I would imagine that the depot would have to be redesigned with a longer maintenance shed. That probably means, to fit in the space, shorter stabling sidings. So one thing is the maintenance shed has only recently achieved its, call it planning consent from Birmingham City Council. If you change it, that process would have to be reopened. So all this may well put the depot on the critical path between leading up even to test running, let alone commercial service. And you may well find you've reduced the stabling capacity of Washwood Heath depot, so I can see what those 7 platforms at Curzon Street are going to be used for, stock berthing overnight.
Yeah, no, that may end up being a bit of a godsend, mightn't it? So, final question then: if you were thinking about doing this, I mean, for the poor people that have now got to sit down for reasons that were nothing to do with them and renegotiate a very complex contract, presumably it would also make sense to consider what comes after the Pendolinos, because if HS2 phase 1 is not open till, let's say, the mid-2030s, the Pendolinos at that point are going to be getting close to, I mean, they'll be a few years away, but close to the end of life. So surely you might as well think about planning for what comes after Pendolino in this renegotiation.
That would make perfect sense. And technically, I don't think there's any reason why an HS2 set should not operate on the West Coast Main Line throughout. So maybe they get used as the Pendolino replacement on the conventional railway until the high-speed railway comes along. Now, I'm not the commercial person. I'm not the person to ask about commercial negotiations. I always screw them up. You should ask my wife. She's far better at them. But I don't see that this should be too difficult, because I can't see that we're going to be asking them to reduce the number of trains. The 54 sets that are ordered were envisaged to cover the phase 1 10 trains an hour service, and therefore 2A by implication. They didn't assume any strengthening of Manchester and Scotland trains. So we're not reducing the specification against which 54 were ordered. What they'd actually be asking them to do is build a few more carriages, to stick 2 more carriages in some of those 54 trains. So actually, you'd think there's quite an upside to the train builder, especially if you can give them some use before the full infrastructure comes along.
An interesting perspective, yeah. I mean, I suppose I just always naturally get concerned that when you've let a contract under a competitive tension, renegotiating it when there is no competitive tension is always fraught with challenge. But I'm sure that some clever people somewhere are thinking about exactly that. As ever, thank you, William. I mean, it is the gift that keeps giving, isn't it, really? Ever since, as you said, that moment in Manchester. And we'll be watching this with interest, and no doubt come back and have another conversation in due course. But for now, William, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Right, pick the bones out of that, Rich. I always enjoy listening to William. He's always very measured and extremely knowledgeable, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And what becomes immediately obvious from that is this not just about changing a train contract. This has big consequential changes elsewhere. The tentacles of this run into lots of issues. So he mentioned there the depot, which is a big issue. You know, the depot at Washwood Heath was built for 200-metre long trains. That's what it's been designed
out
for.
The end doesn't sound good, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I did enjoy his quip about, thank goodness we've now got all those spare platforms at Birmingham and Curzon Street, which we don't need anymore because we're going to need some stabling. But that's just an example, and it's a right pain that Birmingham City Council have just signed off the permission for it, because it feels like someone's going to have to go and ask them for a different set of permissions now, and that could be on the critical path.
But I understand there's even some confusion about who's doing the talking.
Yeah, well, that's a very fair question. So, of course, because it talked about officials, we immediately thought, well, it must be the Department for Transport then. So we called up the Department of Transport and said, so is this story that was in the Times correct? Are you renegotiating? And they said, talk to HS2. Which I have to say that threw us a bit, because, now I suppose it's possibly because the contracting entity that awarded the contract to Hitachi and Alstom is HS2. So kind of legally that does make sense. But if you think that the DFT aren't in the background making sure that they pull all the strings in reality, then I'm afraid you are a bit confused. I'm sure they are. So we did ask HS2, and they said this. They said, The Hitachi-Alstom joint venture are contracted to deliver a fleet of 54 new trains for HS2. No changes have been made to the original order. Well, true. What they didn't say, and I wouldn't have said it either, but I think it's hanging there, is yet, right? So, credible sources tell us that actually what the Times said is broadly right. The one thing that I think's interesting is the number of trains. Now, William, as you heard in there, was not convinced it would be a reduction. I mean, whether it is or whether it isn't, I think the reality comes back to what you said right at the beginning of this, Nigel, which is there's a sort of a law in all major contracting like this. Once you place the contract, you don't change it. You don't vary it. When you do that, it gets very, very expensive. And this one, I think, is whether it's the number of trains, the length of trains, all the consequentials for everything else, this one is going to cost somebody a huge amount of money.
I mean, that principle applies even with your local builder. If you've got him building an extension, it's all agreed. And then you say, can you move those PowerPoints? And he's, and the big prices come. I mean, I have heard it said that train builders are rubbing their hands together at the prospect of variation, that it's a real sort of money pit.
Well, the problem is that when you are tendering, right? So let's assume for a minute you go through a tender process, right? And I'll give you a practical example of this. So when the Pendolino trains, because they become relevant in this as well, by the way, when the Pendolino trains were bought in the late 90s, there was a competitive tender, and right up to the point that Virgin, we said, and the winner is, nobody knew for sure. And so there were things that you got agreed because they wanted to win. Once they've won, that competitive tension disappears. And there's a famous case on the Pendolinos when Chris Green, the chief executive of Virgin Trains, wanted to put those dot matrix, those digital destination blinds in that are set into the doors. And he also wanted to put those famous table lamps
about
in
the
first
lamps,
class.
aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah. Neither of those two things were in the signed agreement with Alstom. They were subsequent variations. And I can tell you, they were very expensive.
Really?
Right? Very expensive because Alstom not unreasonably said, well, that's what they cost. And we had nowhere to go because the contract was with Alstom, right? So that's the issue here.
So is it the case, again, Mr. Train Buyer, that this is one of those rare occasions where actually it's not, get this right, it's not the customer that's got the whip hand, it's a supplier?
The power's moved. No, the power's absolutely moved. And if you think about what the motivation would have been for Alstom and Hitachi in the first place, I suspect, I don't know this, but I think it's a reasonably informed view, is that this order of 54 trains, there was always going to be a follow-on order for Eastern Leg and the other services they wanted to run, right? So these 54 would not have run everything that HS2 was ever going to be. So if you were once you'd won the first order, you had a decent chance of doing follow-on orders. So there might have been an element of some of the margin, if you can call it that, was actually sat in the future orders as well. So if I were Alstom Hitachi looking at this variation now, I'd go, great, I'm never going to get a follow-on order. It's gone. HS2, Eastern Leg, certainly, that's all gone.
That's a good, I hadn't thought of that.
So now,
possible business for the future being gone, that they might want to try and claw something back.
Absolutely. And you can guarantee, and by the way, this is no criticism of any particular supplier. This is just human nature and how it works. There will be an element of, well, if you want to change that, that's going to cost this, and a load of reasons come up for why everything costs so much.
And you've nowhere to go as a buyer on that.
And you have nowhere to go. So the power has moved.
How interesting.
Now, there is another factor here which makes this really complicated. When HS2 phase 1 is eventually opened, and of course, up till now, we've been told between 2029 and 2033, Mark Wilde's doing his big reset, which we are told is relatively imminent, and possibly only because of the Iran war is the reason why we haven't heard it yet. But anyway, that we're about to hear that. it ain't going to be any earlier than 2033, is it, Nigel? Right. So let's let's speculate and say mid 2030s. Those Pendolinos will be 35 years old.
I was going to ask about how they come into it.
They're going to get close to life expiry. So if I were sat here doing this on the government side, I'd go, actually, so I've got a problem now. I've got the wrong length of HS2 trains. That's going to have big implications for my stations. It's going to have big implications for my depots. It's probably going to have implications for my maintenance contract. And I should be thinking about what comes after Pendolinos. I might as well sort all this out in one go. That's very complex stuff, right? And it worries me, and this is where it might sound a bit personal, it's not meant to be, it worries me that people will be doing this who are not that experienced in this kind of contract renegotiation. Whoever is doing this, whether it's HS2 or the DFT, whoever, it has to be people that have done this sort of stuff before, because this is going to be expensive, whatever happens. So it needs to be done by people with serious expertise in this kind of thing.
It's interesting.
That's my concern.
It's interesting you should say that. I'm not sure whether we've ever talked about this before, but at the time the Pendolinos were being bought, a number of people said to me privately, "Oh my God, you've no idea. The Virgin team walking there with their very, very capable lawyers and people and absolutely wrap the DFT around the finger." And I can see that could happen. And we had it with the IETs as well, didn't we? On the whether people are experienced in this sort of thing. You might get a tap on the shoulder yet, Richard.
Well, the IET procurement is a great example of why you don't let people who've not done it before have a crack on a major procurement, right? And that's absolutely the case here. You know, the power has shifted, no question about it. I feel for HST. I kind of feel for the officials, really, at the DFT. You know, this is the consequence of a political decision
by Sunak, and
that was taken by Sunak, listening to a clown of an advisor who did not understand how what all the consequential domino effect of all of this would be, right? And he listened to that person, and they made a stupid decision,
and a horrible mess has resulted.
And a massively horrible mess has resulted. Nobody wanted this to be the discussion we're going to have. Nobody should go away thinking Alstom and Hitachi sat there just doing that, right? And sort of rubbing their hands with glee. Because actually, even for them, this is fraught. This is difficult, right? And actually, this could end up with such a change that, you know, don't forget, you know, Alstom in Derby Litchurch Lane and Newton Aycliffe are not sort of bursting at the seams with orders, right? So this is dangerous territory.
They don't want it to blow up in the faces.
No, this could go wrong. So this requires, as I say, calm minds, very experienced people who know about renegotiating rolling stock contracts. There's a bit me even thought maybe they should just rip it up and start again. It's so fundamental. But I think if you did that,
the original winners' lawyers are going to be rubbing their hands.
Well, all sorts of lawyers get excited if that happens. So it probably is a variation, but my goodness, it's a difficult one.
Can I just ask this? The Pendolino point I was wondering about. So you've answered that comprehensively. They are going to be clapped out and approaching life expectancy. Would it make sense as a 200-metre trains fit to just build more than 54 and replace all the Pendolinos, you say?
Well,
is it not the case that a 200-metre train seats less than a Pendolino?
Right. So just for the maths, a Pendolino, I think, is 265 metres long. And in 11-car format, it's something like 600 seats, which is why this is an issue, right? So if you only run a 200-metre train to Manchester, whereas you were running a 260, you're going to have fewer seats, right? So that's why it's a problem. With the Pendolinos, one relatively little-known fact, perhaps, but do you remember when Chris Gibb,
I do,
the very experienced railwayman who talked about doing a life extension plan on the Pendolinos, he made the point, and he was right to make it, the Pendolinos are actually in remarkably good nick because they were designed to run at 140 miles an hour. They never have done. They're actually slightly understressed
Yes.
compared to what the design
They
was.
have been used at full tilt. Yeah, full tilt. Sorry.
Very good.
No.
So they might have a little bit longer to go.
Oh, right, yeah.
Which might then buy you a bit of time. But I still think the strategy has got to be to look at the whole thing. That would be crazy to do this renegotiation without thinking about Penalinos. One other final point on this, Penalino tilts, obviously. But when I was at Virgin and we were doing Pug 2, one of the reasons why we had 125 mile an hour speed limits with tilt was partly to make sure it was a kind of a moderation of competition point. You had to tilt to be able to do 125, right? And that actually kept out a lot of people. Now, of course, you can do 125 miles an hour on the West Coast Main Line even without a tilting train. And so the time benefits of tilt have actually come down. So it's not unreasonable to look at a strategy now where the future for the West Coast actually is a non-tilt railway. So, as I say, it needs some very careful thought. But I would chuck everything in this now and do the right thing rather than necessarily the expedient thing.
Well, as we know, there's never a wrong time to do the right thing, is there?
Quite.
Right. Shall we move on to the other HS2 story?
Yes.
Was that in iNews this week that the line that would have gone to Manchester will now, quote, end in a field. Under the headline New HS2 farce as final stretch of £100 billion line will end in a field, the iNews reported on March 4th that HS2 is building a 2-kilometre spur of track towards Manchester that ends in a field and is likely to remain unused for decades, the iPaper can reveal. The article went on. The stump of high-speed railway line just outside the city of Lichfield in Staffordshire is under construction despite Rishi Sunak's decision to scrap the northern leg of the project in 2023. Labour has told HS2 bosses to retain the spur as passive provision for a potential extension to the railway at some point in the future. And so the misery piles on, Richard.
Yeah, it does in terms of the reporting. This is actually an area where I think what the Department of Transport and HS2 have done is absolutely the right thing, right? To maintain that passive provision. Because all they're actually doing is, I think, building the bridge over the A38, aren't they?
A stump.
And it is a spur, but it is one that you've then done a really horrible thing, which is get over the A38 if you ever want to redo phase 2. And lest anybody be confused, the government talk about, which they did in January, about an aspiration to build a new line from Birmingham to Manchester. Clearly it can't be called HS2 because that's politically
toxic
at the moment. But it will be, I will, stake a lot on this. It will be on the alignment that was going to be phase 2A, right? Not least of which because they own a load of land on it.
Which we have said from the start, they should definitely just get on and do that 40 miles or whatever it is.
So retaining passive provision, I think, is a perfectly sensible thing. What's really odd about this, I mean, a number of people have written into us about this and said, is it correct that the land acquisition powers have now lapsed for phase 2A? And the answer is yes, they have, right? So I think it was 11th of February or something. So they've now gone. The Act still is there. It's still on the statute, but the deemed planning permission in that Act is still there. I mean, that possibly has a time limit as well, I guess. But the Act is still there. The government are in the process of doing a hybrid bill for a chunk of what was phase 2B, right? Because if you remember when they announced Northern Powerhouse Rail in January, they said, we've thought about it, and the most logical thing to do for a new Liverpool to Manchester railway as part of NPR is to retain that alignment. So there's going to be a hybrid bill for, Highley or Millington, wherever it is, to Manchester. That begs two questions. One is, could they put something in that hybrid bill which would then give them the ability to acquire land in the future for a Birmingham to Manchester railway? Yes, they could. They could do that. So again, the whole thing is a bit of a mess. So it's not the end of the world, that those powers have lapsed.
Because they still do own the land, don't they?
They do. It's not safeguarded
60,
anymore.
It's not safeguarded. That's
no, it's not. So the safeguarding got lifted. They do. And the government have said, because we have this aspiration to do a Birmingham to Manchester railway in the future, and because we all know it's going to be along the alignment of Phase 2A, logically, keeping the land and not selling it off is a sensible thing to do. So yeah, it's another example of that little decision, well, big decision really, but that decision, which was entirely political, to cancel Phase 2, it will ripple down the ages, and is doing so here, and we wait and see what comes out of all of this. But as ending in a field, an unfortunate headline, but actually quite a sensible thing to maintain the passive provision.
But again, politicians, they have pox on all the houses.
There you go. Right, fair enough. That's your considered analysis of the whole thing, isn't it? I love it.
Well, you can't help it, can you? I mean, we've all watched this slow motion car crash for years now, and we're perilously close to the point at which we're going to have to be resisting or not resisting the temptation to say, "Told you."
We are now calling at a short ad break. Do not alight here.
Arguably, one of the most confusing things about booking train tickets is split ticketing, where it can often be cheaper to buy a ticket from A to B and then another one from B to C, rather than just buy a ticket from A to C in the first place. Not all websites and operators offer you automatic split ticketing options to save you money though, so sometimes it can be hard to find the best deal. Ticket retailer Tickety Boo has just launched split ticketing on their app. The feature is only available on the app rather than the website, but you can simply tick the box to say you'd like split ticketing options, and the app will automatically work out the complicated bit for you and tell you how much you can save. It's just another way that Tickety Boo is trying to take the faff and the nonsense out of booking tickets. And remember, they don't charge a booking fee, and there are no amendment fees or admin fees for refunds either. They also don't charge split share fees, unlike some other providers. Tickety Boo are also offering a £5 discount on your first booking with them, using code GREENSIGNALS5 at myticketyboo.com. So you can save even more when you give them a try.
And now, back to the show.
Right, time for a teaser now. One of the very popular features of Green Signals are Richard's reviews and resulting discussions of hearings in Parliament's Transport Select Committee. Richard has shed a new light on a vitally important but not widely seen before part of the parliamentary process, in which select committees hold governments of the day to account on policy delivery and their plans. Now, current TSC chair is Ruth Cadbury MP. Earlier this week, Richard met Ruth in Westminster to chat about the TSC's work, how she balances her scrutiny of ministers and officials with her work as a Labour MP, and what inspired her to get into politics in the first place. Let's take a look.
I want to pick on one thing particularly, because people may not realise, of course, you have an inquiry, then you publish a report, and then there's a government response, and the government sort of says what it's going to do in response to your report. And you had a report recently. I mean, I say recently, I think it was May last year, wasn't it? Access denied. And that's a big chunky report. And there's a lot of passion in that as well. When you read that, this is clearly an issue that means a lot to a lot of people. I mean, I've got a couple of questions on it in a minute, but is that a fair summary? I've really felt the passion in that.
Yes, I've long been passionate about accessibility ever since I was in my late 20s, chair of the planning committee, and we, with the planning officers, we had an access day and borrowed some wheelchairs from the hospital and experienced directly firsthand what it's like to have and that's only one aspect of disability or mobility, being in a wheelchair, and I've learnt a lot more in more recent years, and particularly around neurodiversity. When on the previous committee committee, when that work actually started in the previous committee when Ian Stewart was chair, and actually what we published in February last year was the conclusion of the work, where the bulk of the work had been done before. But yeah, we are passionate. Several of our committee have got direct experience, at least 2 parents of young children pushing buggies around. And I just feel that good accessibility, which I've experienced in different parts of the UK and other countries as well, it doesn't just affect somebody who is disabled or their carer, but sooner or later we're all heavy, carrying heavy luggage, pushing kids in buggies, having injuries or declining health. Decent accessibility benefits all rail users when we're talking about rail.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, the railway should be for everybody who wants to use it, not just the chosen
and
few.
In a seamless way, not have to, you've got to go around the other way if you want to get into this station.
Yeah, it's patronising at best, isn't it?
It's got to be seamless, because good accessibility and good, for instance, clear information provided in a number of different channels benefits all users, whether somebody who's new to that route or that station, or somebody who's neurodiverse or got learning disabilities or sight impairment. It works for everybody when it's done properly.
Now, we'll publish the full interview at midday on Tuesday, March 17th, so please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and switch on notifications so you don't miss out on that or anything else we do as it happens. It's a great discussion and a really interesting window on a very important world. And now it's time to thank everyone who supports us. First of all, thanks to RIA, the Railway Industries Association, our programme supporter, and to Rail Business Daily, our media supporter. Then our usual huge thank you to the growing list this week, to everyone who's left us a super thanks on YouTube. So big deep breath. You all are Bob Walsh, Phil Craig, John Kirkman, Alan Kirkman, Peter Curtis, Mark Woods, Mike Heinson-Evans, Andrew Seddon, Iskra Railway Videos, Studio 65, Graham Whitley, Chris Exley, Richard R., Alistair Rutledge, the Independent Brigline Rail Group, John W., Pete Driver, Nigel Mapston, Simon Hall, Graham Webster, and Howard Jones. Thank you to all of you for leaving us a super thanks. We really do value your support very much indeed, and make sure that we can do what we need to do.
Absolutely, we do. And thanks also to our new silver members, No Madders and Philip Downham, and to Mark Shelley, who upgraded to silver this week as well. We do publish a list of all our members, bronze, silver, gold, in the end credits of the show. They do help us make Green Signals possible. So if you're not already a member and you enjoy what we do and you'd like to support us a bit more, please click join on YouTube or click the link in the description to our Patreon page to find out more.
Please do. We're delighted to have you along. And now it's time for this week's Railway News Roundup. Now, so many of you sent us this story. It's just too big a list to read out, I'm afraid. And it's news of the catastrophic fire that broke out at 15:45 on Sunday in a vape shop in an iconic B-listed Victorian building known as Union Corner in Glasgow. The dramatic images show the building, whose famous corner dome was destroyed, totally gutted and internally collapsed as a result of the fire, with many affected businesses simply destroyed. The building is adjacent to Glasgow Central railway station, the busiest in Scotland, and all services have been suspended since Sunday afternoon. As of recording this show on Wednesday, March 11th, Glasgow Central Low Level reopened today, March 11th, but the main station remains closed. It's understood, however, that Network Rail does not believe there's been serious damage inside the station, which they have now been able to visit following the fire. I always liked those beautiful wooden first floor offices on the concourse, Richard. They were thought to be at risk for a while. To reopen, though, it is thought possible that Glasgow City Council may decide the corner facade that is still standing may need to be demolished in order to make the site safe. I would think that's inevitable, frankly. Then clearly NR has a fair amount of its own work to do too.
Indeed, and it's quite clear that everybody did an amazing job stopping that fire spreading, and didn't they?
Yes.
As you and I were talking off camera. So thanks to Steve Roberts and Jim Millington for this one. You'll love this one. You'll love this one, Nigel. Right? It's a remarkable story that's appeared in the local and regional press in Herefordshire, including on the BBC website.
Don't tell me a barn pot opening scheme.
Oh, how did you guess that? Right. Anyway, which is, and the story was, the potential restoration of a former rail link has moved a step closer. And I thought, oh, aye. After it apparently narrowly secured support from a local authority. And I refer, of course, to the Gloucester to Hereford rural branch line via Ross on Wye. Now, apparently, I know I can tell you're all over this.
Hold the front page.
Apparently, a feasibility study will now be carried out over the next year on proposals to reconnect Hereford, Ross on Wye and Gloucester by train. Now, I know this part of the world really well. I used to live in Ross on Wye. This is intriguing stuff. Now, Liberal Democrat councillor Louis Stark, who is clearly one of the movers and shakers of this scheme, is reported as saying, and we're only going off what we've seen in other media channels, by the way, as saying that axing the line in the mid-1960s was one of the greatest pieces of economic and social vandalism to happen to the people of Ross and South Herefordshire.
Wow.
The Hereford Times reports Councillor Stark as then saying that with the creation of a state-run Great British Railways and devolving of control over transport decisions, quote, according to the Hereford Times, the government are splashing the cash, and this will form a more rounded package to put to them along with the bypass. I presume there's a road scheme as well, Councillor Stark said. Now, I just remind Green Signallers, regular listeners, of Lord Hendy's comments to the Transport Select Committee when he pointed out there isn't enough money, right? So that doesn't sit very comfortably with splashing the cash. Anyway, these, however, are the best quotes. Councillor Matthew Engel described the idea as a whimsy and said it was a distraction from plausible and necessary improvements needed on the county's existing rail infrastructure. And Councillor Jim Kenyon went further, apparently, and said the proposals were fruit bat loopy.
Oh, good.
Councillor Kenyon, take a bow. It absolutely is loopy. And it's not going to happen. It will go nowhere. They'll waste more money and time on a feasibility study, get people's hopes up, and it simply won't happen. And actually, worse than that, nor should it. I don't think this is an appropriate use of heavy rail in a transport setting to connect these very, very rural communities. I mean, Ross and Wye isn't, but this isn't the way to do it. So, another example of a daft idea, I fear.
Can't disagree, Richard. Can't disagree. Elsewhere, and thanks to our old friend Paul at the Independent Brig Line Rail Group for this one, a Labour MP has said that the Robin Hood line in Nottinghamshire should be extended. Michelle Welsh, MP for Sherwood Forest, raised the matter in a debate in Westminster on February 10th. Now, there's not been passenger services serving the villages of Warsop, Edwinstowe and Ollerton on the line from Shirebrook towards High Marnham, much of which is now a test track, of course, since the 1950s. Nottinghamshire County Council published a report in 2015 on the potential reopening of those stations as part of a Robin Hood line extension, but the work never materialised. Michelle Welsh is reported as saying that the extension would be important economically and culturally because it would help connect residents with Nottingham and make it easier for tourists to visit. A bit like Councillor Stark, right?
I mean, at least the track is there, isn't it? At least then the line is there.
Yeah, but it was at Oakhampton, and it's not just a case of brushing the rust off the rails and off we go.
That's actually a very good analogy. Yeah. Right. Tube drivers who are members of the RMT, because some are RMT, some are ASLEF, have apparently voted in favour of strike action to oppose the introduction of a 4-day week. According to a BBC story, which was on the 27th of February, an RMT spokesperson said, "Our members will not accept TfL's plan to condense the working week for tube drivers, where shift patterns will become unpredictable, leading to fatigue and increasing safety risks. Now, TfL, on the other hand, Transport for London, apparently said the change would be voluntary with no reduction in contractual hours and would improve reliability at no extra cost. Okay. What's really interesting about this story, though, is that Rail News reported an ASLEF source as saying this: "It's a shame that the RMT leadership has decided to campaign against a proposal that gives drivers an extra 35 days off every year, along with a reduction in days and hours at work on a voluntary basis. If the RMT are to call a strike on this issue, it will be the first time in history that a trade union has asked its members to strike to stop workers having a shorter working week with more time off for no loss of pay." That is intriguing. And it actually goes further. So in the ASLEF Journal in July last year, Finn Brennan, who is the District 8 organiser and a full-time organiser on London Underground, wrote a piece which included this. Whilst it is understandable that people will have concerns about changes to long-standing working conditions, it is difficult to excuse the deliberate spreading of falsehoods by those who put personal benefits or their own political project ahead of improvements for the grade as a whole. So it does sound like there's quite a significant disagreement over whether this 4-day week and the proposals that TfL have put forward are sensible or not. But as it stands at the moment, the RMT are looking to take strike action. We'll be following, and we'll follow this one as it no doubt develops.
When you get expressions like spreading falsehoods. So, thanks to David Redgewell now for this one. On Monday, March 2nd, the aspirant open access operator Wrexham, Shropshire and Midlands Railway ran a charter using branded coaching stock from Eastern Rail Services in Great Yarmouth and GBRF traction from Wrexham to London Euston as part of its lobby campaign to be allowed to run 3 trains a day each way between Euston and Wrexham General under firm rights, with a 4th service under contingent rights. Once in London, the campaigners, who included local MPs, handed in over 100 letters from people urging government to back the proposal. However, Network Rail has already said it will not support the new service, which actually has already been proposed and rejected previously. In a 14-page letter to ORR on January the 9th, Network Rail explained that West Coast mainline congestion still applies and services would have to use fire break paths, which are there specifically to provide operational breathing space for performance and management and service recovery. The letter also highlighted plenty of other key issues, such as in the Water Orton area, where Network Rail said this section of the network is also used by Birmingham to Derby and Leicester cross-country services and is a key corridor for freight. Performing the moves that the proposed services by WSMR would undertake are extremely constrained, with the result that a high proportion of the proposed WSMR services conflict in the Water Orton area.
Could be interesting, isn't it? See how the ORR deal with that one, given in a world, of course, where it's going to be the responsibility of GBR in the future. Thanks to John Kirkman for this one. Avanti West Coast will be running trains over the Settle-Carlisle line again.
Hooray!
Nigel, when a blockade on the West Coast main line for a renewal works means the usual route is closed between April the 11th and April the 20th. Now, of course, Avanti West Coast did run shuttles on the Settle-Carlisle line in January when the West Coast main line was closed during the rebuilding of the bridge at Clifton Bridge across the M6 near Penrith. And it's fair to say that at the time they faced some significant challenges with that. And actually, I mean, Avanti West Coast have been very upfront about it and said, look, between January the 1st and January the 14th, we operated 169 services on the Settle-Carlisle route to keep rail travel open for the northwest while Clifton Bridge was replaced. But they went on to say a combination of extreme weather, train faults and infrastructure issues elsewhere on the route meant we were unable to run some of our planned services. As this was our first time operating on the Settle-Carlisle line, We've taken on board learnings to make sure our operation runs better in April so our customers get the service that they deserve. Well, good luck to them. It did have issues in January, and as they say, some of that, it was fearsome weather, I think, at times. Hopefully the slightly more clement weather of Easter will assist.
Clement, good word. I'm just pleased that they didn't let it put them off having another go. And congratulations, Richard, on getting through all 4 paragraphs there without once using the word diversion or diversionary.
It was not bad, was it? Right? Because they were shuttles. So there you go.
What is a diversion? Not a diversion when it's a shuttle. Right.
Quite.
The east-west rail line between Oxford and Bletchley is still, snowdrops have come and gone again, not open to passenger services more than 500 days after it was completed. It is, however, open to freight, and recently Richard, lucky blighter, enjoyed a mega jolly Class 66 cab ride on an intermodal service, no less, from Didcot to Northampton Gateway. He saw the entirety of the new line, and indeed, just to whet your appetite and no doubt wind up the good citizens of Winslow, who have a shiny new station but no trains, here's a sneak preview.
The Oxford to Cambridge line, when completed, ran broadly west to east. Although a continuous line from Oxford to Cambridge was proposed from time to time, it was actually built by local schemes. From west to east, these were the Buckinghamshire Railway from Oxford to Bletchley, the Bedford Railway from Bletchley to Bedford, and the Bedford and Cambridge Railway, which adopted the alignments of an earlier private scheme, the Sandy and Potton Railway. And in time, these sections were all incorporated into the London and North Western Railway.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that. I did. We'll publish that entire video tomorrow, Friday, March 13th. And it actually really is a great watch, if a little frustrating as he speeds through Winslow, that he's still awaiting its first passenger trains, when I think all the information boards all working, showing trains that are never going to be there at the moment. Talk about being all dressed up and nowhere to go, Richard?
Absolutely.
And that's the news roundup for this week. If you'd like to send us any snippets of news, big stories, little stories, please do so. And you can drop us an email at news@greensignals.org. We can't promise to read them all out, but if we use yours, we'll attach your name to it. So do let us know.
Which means it's now time to do the quiz.
Hooray. Hooray.
Now, last week's question was this. It was a listener question from Andrew Kirkham. And it was, which station on the Great British National Network was named after a fictional place? We had dozens and dozens of answers. The most popular by far being Edinburgh Waverley, which is not the correct answer. All right. Now, it is true that Waverley comes from the Scott, novels, very famous Scott novels. But obviously Edinburgh is not a fictional place. And the actual place that it was named after in the novels was actually the hero's estate, wasn't it? Which was the Waverley Honour Estate. What we were really looking for was somewhere where it was the place, the station was named after. There was, no connection with anything. It was named after a fictional place. And there is a connection to Scott, actually, because the answer is Tullytidlum, right? Which was, is completely fictional in a Scott novel. It's actually, it was on the former, I think, the Lesmahago line in Lanarkshire. And subsequent to the station opening, a community did build up around the station, which has subsequently been called Tullytidlum. But when the station was opened, it was named after a completely fictional place. So I decided to be very strict this week, and that was the answer. And the winner, because guess what? People still got it. And the winner, randomly chosen from the correct answers we had, was Montgomery Head. So well done, Montgomery. If you send us an email to quiz@greensignals.org, I'll get your mug out to you. But that was a tough one this week, and only didn't allow Edinburgh Waverley because it had the word Edinburgh in it. But,
I'd never heard of any of that.
There you go. It's good, isn't it? It's good. Thank you to Andrew Kirk. I knew that was a good question.
Yeah.
And so it proved. And therefore, to this week's quiz question, Nigel, which also comes from a listener, from Ego Francaccini, who recently won the quiz, actually, and has come up with an absolute, I think this is brilliant. See what you think of this one, right? We'd like anybody who wants to enter this week's quiz question to see if they can name a UK station on the national network. So no London Underground, please, no heritage lines, right? It's on the national network, which has a level crossing at both ends of the station platforms.
Oh.
Right? If you think you know anywhere on the national network where there's a level crossing, a road level crossing at both ends of the station platforms, then please answers to quiz@greensignals.org by midday, Saturday, March 14th. We'll put all the correct answers in a hat and select a winner at random to receive one of our mugs.
I'm looking forward
That's
to
the
hearing
quiz.
about that one. I'd like to see a picture of it as well.
Mm. And I have checked on Google Earth or Maps, whatever it is, and indeed it is correct. So there you go.
I really am looking forward to that one then. Okay, right. And a good story to end on this week, Richard. LNER launched a Hollywood-style Walk of Fame at London King's Cross and York stations ahead of International Women's Day on March 8th to celebrate women in rail. Stars were installed on the concourses for Elizabeth Holman, who disguised herself as a man to work on the railway, Gladys Garlick, who was one of the first female train guards and served during the Second World War air raids, are among those honoured. And modern-day women, including train drivers Helen Donaher, whose quick thinking helped save a passenger's life, and Rezwana Rahman, the first female LNER driver to wear a hijab, as well as Ellie Burrows, Regional Managing Director for Eastern Region at Network Rail. The stars were unveiled as data reveals that 97% of British people have no idea just how many women currently work in the UK rail industry. It's over 35,000, with a further 72% having no knowledge of the stories of the women who have helped shape the railway. The stars were in place at London King's Cross until after International Women's Day and have now been moved into the Family Lounge at King's Cross and in York Railway Station. People can scan the QR code on the installation, which takes them to lner.co.uk to read more about the incredible stories of these remarkable women. How about that, Richard?
It's brilliant. These are such good things to celebrate. So well done, LNER.
They are, and it's not sort of things that are essential, and there is a cost to them. So well done to David Horner's team for saying, no, we're going to do this.
Yep.
And sadly, that's all we've got time for this week. So thanks so much for watching or listening. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, or if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you anything, helps us a lot. And if you really want to support us, find out about joining as a member on YouTube or Patreon. But most importantly, join Richard and me again next week on Thursday at noon for this show, which will always be free. And we'll see you then. Until then, it's goodbye from me and
it's goodbye from me.
Have a wonderful week.